In the bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the sky and streets hummed with life, there lay two contrasting worlds. Samantha's cosy apartment, nestled in a modest neighborhood, and Laura's grandiose house, a veritable castle in the affluent part of town. It was in these disparate settings that the childhood friendship of Samantha and Laura blossomed. Samantha, a bright-eyed girl with a heart full of dreams, lived with her parents in a small but warm apartment. Her world was simple, yet filled with love. Laura, on the other hand, was the only child of wealthy parents, her life a canvas of luxury and indulgence. Their friendship began in the corridors of St. Mary's School. One rainy afternoon, as they huddled under a shared umbrella, Laura invited Samantha over. "Sam, you must come over this weekend. We'll have so much fun," Laura exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Samantha hesitated. "I'd love to, Laura, but isn't your house like a castle?" Laura laughed. "It's just a house, Sam. A big one, maybe, but it's nothing without my..." The weekend arrived, and Samantha stepped into Laura's world for the first time. The house, grand and imposing, was like something out of a fairy tale. As they walked through the ornate hallway, Laura chattered about her favourite rooms. "This is the living room, and oh, you must see the garden." "It's beautiful this time of the year," Laura said, pulling Samantha along. Samantha gazed around in awe. "Laura, this is incredible. It's like being in a..." Laura's mother, Mrs. Richardson, appeared, her presence as elegant as the house. "Welcome, Samantha. We've heard so much about you. Laura is lucky to have a friend like you." The girls spent the day exploring every nook and cranny of the house. Despite the opulence surrounding her, Samantha felt a warmth in Laura's home, a testament to the family's hospitality. As they sat in Laura's room, surrounded by plush toys and gadgets, Samantha shared stories of her own home, humble yet filled with laughter. Laura listened intently. "I wish I could visit your house someday, Sam. It sounds so..." "You should. My mom makes the best apple pie," Samantha replied, smiling. As dusk fell, the girls sat by the window, watching the stars appear in the twilight sky. The differences in their worlds seemed to fade away, leaving only the pure bond of friendship. "Laura, do you think we'll be friends forever?" Samantha asked, a hint of wistfulness in her. Laura took Samantha's hand. "Forever and ever, Sam. No matter where life takes us, we'll always have this moment and this friendship." That day marked the beginning of an unbreakable bond between Samantha and Laura. Despite the stark contrast between the castle and the apartment, their friendship transcended the boundaries of their worlds, woven together by promises and dreams under the starlight sky. As the seasons changed, so did the lives of Samantha and Laura. The innocent laughter of childhood slowly gave way to the thoughtful conversations of adolescence. They were standing at the crossroads of life, where choices would set the course of their future. One evening, nestled in Samantha's modest living room, the girls, now young women, spoke of their dreams. Samantha, her eyes reflecting determination, shared her aspirations. "I've been thinking a lot about college. I want to study environmental science. I feel like there's so much I can do to make a difference." Laura, lounging on the worn but comfortable sofa, looked thoughtful. "That's amazing, Sam. I always knew you'd do something meaningful. As for me, I'm not sure. I feel like I want more. Something exciting, something fast-paced." Months rolled by, and the day came when Samantha received her college acceptance letter. She rushed to Laura's house to share the news. "Laura, I got in. I'm going to college." Samantha burst out, waving the letter. Laura hugged her. "Congrats, Sam. That's incredible. I knew you'd make it." But there was a hint of sadness in Laura's voice. She held up a glossy magazine. "I've been thinking of trying my luck in modelling. The glitz, the glam, it's all so enticing." Samantha's excitement dimmed slightly. Modelling? But what about college? Laura shrugged. I don't know. College feels so ordinary. I want something extraordinary. As Samantha immersed herself in college life, Laura stepped into the world of fashion. Their meetings became less frequent, their conversations shorter. Yet, they tried to keep the bond alive. During a rare coffee meet-up, the gap between them was palpable. Samantha, sipping her coffee, asked tentatively, "How's the modelling world, Laura?" Laura, looking more glamorous but less happy, forced a smile. "It's exciting. Parties people travel, but it's also exhausting. And sometimes I feel so alone." Samantha reached across the table. "You know you can always talk to me, right? No matter what." Laura nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I know, Sam. It's just, everything's so different now." One cold winter evening, Samantha called Laura, hoping to reconnect. The phone rang, but there was no answer. Days turned into weeks, and Laura's presence faded from Samantha's life, leaving a void filled with unanswered questions. Samantha, walking through the college campus, reflected on the changes. She whispered to herself, "I miss her. I hope she's okay." The paths of Samantha and Laura, once so closely intertwined, had diverged. Samantha, engrossed in her studies, was making strides towards her future, while Laura, chasing the allure of a glamorous life, seemed to drift further away. The promise of eternal friendship, once bright and unbreakable, now flickered uncertainly in the winds of change. Months turned into years, and the once unbreakable bond between Samantha and Laura grew fragile under the weight of distance and silence. Samantha, now deeply engrossed in her environmental studies, found her thoughts often wandering to Laura, whose social media presence had become a college of glamorous events and exotic locations. One breezy autumn afternoon, Samantha, seated in the university library, decided to reach out again. She dialed Laura's number, the familiar sequence etched in her memory. "Come on, Laura, please pick up," she murmured, but the call went straight to voicemail. A pang of worry gnawed at her. It wasn't like Laura to be completely unreachable. Weeks of silence turned into months. The lack of contact from Laura was unlike anything before. Concerned, Samantha decided to visit Laura's family home. The once vibrant house stood eerily quiet. She rang the bell, her heart racing. Laura's mother, Mrs. Richardson, opened the door. Her face, once full of warmth and grace, now seemed etched with lines of worry. "Samantha, dear, it's been so long. Please come in," she said, her voice a tired whisper. Samantha stepped inside, the familiar grandeur of the house now overshadowed by a sombre atmosphere. "Mrs. Richardson, I've been trying to reach Laura. Is she okay?" Mrs. Richardson sighed, leading Samantha to the living room. "I wish I knew, my dear. Laura, she's been gone for months now. One day she just left, no word, no call. We don't know where she is or if she's safe." Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. Gone. But why did "We don't know, Samantha. She seemed so happy with her life, her career. But maybe we didn't see the whole picture," Mrs. Richardson confessed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Samantha, her mind racing, tried to piece together the last few conversations she had with Laura. "She never mentioned anything to me, just that she was busy. I thought it was just the lifestyle." The room was filled with a heavy silence, the air thick with unspoken fears and questions. Samantha looked around at the pictures of Laura on the walls, radiant, but perhaps hiding an inner turmoil. "Is there anything I can do, Mrs. Richardson? Any way I can help find her?" Samantha asked, her voice firm with resolve. Mrs. Richardson shook her head. "We've tried everything, Samantha. The police, private investigators. But it's like she vanished into thin air. Her father, he couldn't bear it. He passed away 6 months ago." Samantha's heart ached at the news. The memory of their childhood promise echoed in her mind. A promise of eternal friendship, now adrift in a sea of uncertainty. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Richardson. I had no idea. Laura and we were so close once. I can't believe she's just gone." Mrs. Richardson reached out, her hand trembling. "You were always a good friend to her, Samantha. I know she cherished your friendship." As Samantha left the Richardson house, the reality of Laura's disappearance settled heavily on her shoulders. The girl who once dreamed of a life filled with excitement and glamour was now a mystery. Her whereabouts unknown, her laughter a distant memory. Samantha walked away, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Worry, confusion, and a deep, lingering sense of loss for her childhood friend who had vanished without a trace. Years after Laura's disappearance, Samantha found herself yearning for closure. Her successful career as an environmental scientist felt incomplete without her childhood friend to share it with. One crisp Saturday morning, she decided to visit the Richardson home once more, hoping to reconnect with a part of her past. As Samantha approached the once magnificent Richardson house, she was struck by its transformation. The vibrant garden was now overgrown, the paint on the walls peeled and faded. Hesitantly, she rang the doorbell, her heart pounding with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Richardson. Age and sorrow had taken their toll, leaving her a frail shadow of the woman Samantha remembered. "Samantha, is it really you?" Mrs. Richardson's voice trembled with surprise. "Yes, Mrs. Richardson, it's me." I wanted to see how you were doing," Samantha replied, her voice laden with emotion. Mrs. Richardson led Samantha into the house. The grandeur that once filled the space was replaced by a sense of emptiness and neglect. "I'm sorry for the state of the place. After my husband passed and with Laura gone, it's been hard," Mrs. Richardson explained, guiding Samantha to the living room. Samantha looked around, memories flooding back. "I have so many fond memories of this place. It's hard to see it like this." They sat down, and Mrs. Richardson poured some tea. The ritual felt familiar yet distant. "Mrs. Richardson, have you had any news of Laura?" Samantha asked gently. "No, dear, not a word. It's like she just disappeared off the face of the earth." Mrs. Richardson sighed, her eyes welling up. "I always thought she'd come back, even just to say goodbye." Samantha reached out, touching Mrs. Richardson's hand. "I miss her too. We were so close once. I can't help but wonder if I could have done something more." Mrs. Richardson shook her head. "Don't blame yourself, Samantha. We all thought she was living her dream. Maybe we just didn't see the signs." The afternoon passed with shared stories and silent reflections. Samantha realized how much Mrs. Richardson needed someone to talk to, someone to remember Laura with. As Samantha prepared to leave, she turned to Mrs. Richardson. "I'll come back to visit, if that's okay with you. Maybe I can help around the house. Mrs. Richardson smiled, a flicker of her old warmth shining through. "I'd like that, Samantha. It's been so lonely here." Thank you. Walking back to her car, Samantha felt a mix of sadness and determination. The visit had reopened old wounds, but it also reignited a sense of purpose. She had lost Laura, but she wouldn't lose the connection to the family that had been such a big part of her childhood. As she drove away, Samantha realized that sometimes revisiting the past could be the key to finding peace in the present. Samantha's visits to Mrs. Richardson became a regular part of her life. Each visit brought a sense of comfort to the elderly woman, and for Samantha, a feeling of connection to her past and to Laura. One Saturday, as Samantha was tending to the overgrown garden, Mrs. Richardson watched from the porch. "You've brought life back to this old house, Samantha. I can't thank you enough." "It's the least I can do, Mrs. Richardson. This house holds so many memories for me too," Samantha replied, wiping sweat from her brow. One day, after leaving Mrs. Richardson's house, Samantha's car broke down. Waiting at the bus stop, she noticed a man with a young girl, around 8 years old, playing nearby. The child's laughter was infectious, and Samantha found herself smiling. The man noticed Samantha's gaze and walked over with the girl. Hi, I'm Jeffrey, and this is my daughter, Nicole. You seem familiar. Have we met before? Samantha shook her head. I don't think so. I'm Samantha. It's nice to meet you both. Over the next few weeks, Samantha frequently met Jeffrey and Nicole on the bus. Their conversations grew longer, and soon they were sharing stories about their lives. One afternoon, Jeffrey asked, "Would you like to join us for a coffee?" Nicole has been asking about. Samantha hesitated for a moment but then smiled. I'd love to, thank you. Their casual meetups became a routine. Samantha found herself looking forward to their conversations, and Nicole's bright, cheerful demeanour was a breath of fresh air. One Saturday, as they sat in the park, Nicole asked Samantha, "Do you have any kids?" Samantha laughed. "No, I don't, Nicole, but I do enjoy spending time with you." Jeffrey smiled. "Nicole has taken quite a liking to you, and I must admit." Samantha felt her cheeks warm at his words. There was a comfort and ease in their company that she hadn't felt in a long time. As autumn turned to winter, Samantha's relationship with Jeffrey and Nicole deepened. They spent weekends together, exploring the city, visiting museums, and enjoying cozy dinners. One chilly evening, as they walked through the park, Jeffrey said, "Samantha, I don't say this lightly, but you've brought so much joy into our lives. Nicole and we'd love for you to be a part of our family." Samantha stopped, her heart racing. "Jeffrey, I feel the same." Samantha's life, once focused solely on her career and the mystery of Laura's disappearance, was now filled with new light and laughter. Jeffrey and Nicole had become a part of her world, filling a void she hadn't known was there. As they walked home, hand in hand under the starlight sky, Samantha felt a sense of completeness. Though the mystery of Laura's absence lingered, the joy of new beginnings shone brightly, promising a future filled with love and Samantha's visits to Mrs. Richardson's house had become a cherished routine. During one such visit, as they were sipping tea in the living room, Mrs. Richardson decided to reminisce about the past. "I found some old photo albums while cleaning, Samantha. Would you like to see them? There are pictures of Laura you might not have seen," Mrs. Richardson offered, a nostalgic glimmer in her eyes. "Of course, I'd love to," Samantha replied, intrigued. As they flipped through the pages filled with memories, Samantha was transported back to her childhood days with Laura. Then they reached a section of the album dedicated to Laura's early adult life. "That's Laura at a fashion event," Mrs. Richardson pointed out. "And here she is on a holiday. She was always so adventurous." Samantha nodded, absorbed in the photos. Then she turned the page and froze. There was a photo of Laura with a man she recognized immediately. It was Jeffrey, holding a baby. "Mrs. Richardson, who is this man with Laura?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, that's Jeffrey, Laura's former fiancé. They were so in love. But after Laura disappeared, we lost contact. And that's their daughter, Nicole," Mrs. Richardson explained, unaware of Samantha's shock. Samantha's mind raced as she tried to process the revelation. "Nicole is Laura's daughter," she murmured, her heart pounding. "Yes, dear. It was such a difficult time. After Laura left, Jeffrey took sole custody. We tried to stay in touch, but it was too painful, I suppose," Mrs. Richardson said, sighing. Samantha sat there, stunned. The man she had grown to care for, the child she adored. They were Laura's family. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. "Mrs. Richardson, does Jeffrey know where Laura is?" Samantha asked, her thoughts spinning. "No, he doesn't. He tried to find her too, for Nicole's sake. But Laura just vanished," Mrs. Richardson replied, a sad look in her eyes. Samantha excused herself, needing time to think. As she drove home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The past and present were now inexplicably intertwined. Jeffrey, the man she was falling for, was once the love of her best friend's life, and Nicole, the child she adored, was Laura's daughter. Should I tell Jeffrey, What about Mrs. Richardson? Will this change everything? She thought aloud, the weight of the secret heavy on her heart. Samantha realized the delicate nature of what she had uncovered. She had the power to reveal a truth that could potentially unravel the new life she had built with Jeffrey and Nicole. Yet there was also a chance for healing and closure, for her, for Jeffrey, and for Miss Richardson. Samantha knew she had to tread carefully. Whatever decision she made, it would change their lives forever. As she sat in her car, parked outside her home, she knew one thing for certain. The truth, however complicated, had a way of surfacing, and she needed to be prepared for the aftermath. Samantha sat in her favourite armchair, gazing out the window at the twilight sky. The discovery of Laura's connection to Jeffrey and Nicole had cast a long shadow over her thoughts. She held the photo of Laura, Jeffrey, and baby Nicole in her hands, the edges worn from her frequent handling. "Life is so unpredictable," she whispered to herself. "What do I do with this truth?" Later that week, Samantha met Jeffrey at their favourite cafe. The air was thick with unspoken words as they sat down with their coffees. "Jeffrey, there's something important I need to tell you," Samantha began, her voice trembling. Jeffrey looked concerned. "What is it, Samantha? You seem troubled." She took a deep breath. "I recently found out something about Laura, Nicole's mother. It's about her past, and it involves you." Jeffrey's expression changed to one of surprise. "Laura? What about her?" Samantha handed him the photograph. "This is you, Laura, and Nicole, right?" Jeffrey took the photo, his eyes widening in shock. "Where did you get this?" "I found it with Mrs. Richardson, Laura's mother. She told me about your past with Laura," Samantha explained, watching his reaction closely. Jeffrey was silent for a moment, then spoke. "I never expected this to come up again. I've tried to move on for Nicole's sake." Samantha reached for his hand. "I understand that this is hard, but I thought you should know. Nicole has a right to know about her mother and Mrs. Richardson. She misses Laura dearly." Jeffrey nodded, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "You're right, Samantha. I've kept this part of my life closed for so long. Maybe it's time Nicole knew about her mother, and perhaps it's time I reconnected with Mrs. Richardson." Samantha smiled, relieved. "I'll be here, for both you and Nicole, no matter what you decide." Together, they decided to visit Mrs. Richardson. The meeting was emotional, filled with tears and revelations. Mrs. Richardson held Nicole close, telling her stories about Laura, her daughter. Nicole, wide-eyed and curious, listened intently. "So my mum was like an adventurer?" she asked. "Yes, darling." "She was," Mrs. Richardson replied, smiling through her tears. Samantha stood by, watching the scene unfold. She felt a sense of peace, knowing she had helped bridge the gap between the past and the present. Later, as she walked back to her car, Samantha reflected on her journey. She had become the silent guardian of a story that intertwined her life with those she cared about. In revealing the truth, she had opened a door to healing and understanding. As she drove away, Samantha felt a sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but it held the promise of love, family, and newfound connections. She had honoured her friendship with Laura by bringing her story full circle, and in doing so, she had found her own place in this tapestry of life. "Here's to new beginnings," Samantha whispered to herself, a smile spreading across her face as she embraced the road ahead.